So, hi everyone, 10 years of new market research, NewMR. My name is Ray Pointer and I'm going to be chairing the session today. And just before we meet our panel of four super experts who were on the webinar 10 years ago when it was the very first NewMR broadcast and one of the first webinars anywhere in the world that was looking at market research, I'm going to do one or two bits of housekeeping. Perhaps the most important is to say a big thank you to all of the sponsors. There are costs involved in putting on these NewMR webinars, in running the operation. There are licensing costs, platforms, even being able to send out those newsletters, all has a background cost. The way that we can offer these webinars and the blogs and all the rest of it for free is that these wonderful organizations here sponsor NewMR. So have a look at who they are. Some of them have been with us right from the start. A few of them, like further, have changed their names, but many years of support from these organizations, which is fantastic. The next time you're looking for one of the products or services from these organizations, please do consider them. And if you are ever talking to these organizations, just mention that you noticed they were sponsors of NewMR and say how much you appreciate them sponsoring NewMR, because that will help them make that decision to renew their sponsorship for NewMR, which is fantastic. And these are the four wonderful people today. Not looking quite as they did 10 years ago, I think in most cases, but looking really well from Australia, China, India, and again from Australia. So I'm going to ask the panel just to briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to look at the four topics they brought along to discuss today. So, hi Sue.
Hi Ray, hello everyone. My name's Sue York. I have relatively recently started working for the Research Society in Australia as the training manager, but 10 years ago, through probably a series of events that none of us can exactly remember, I ended up co-founding NewMR with Ray, and there have been many people involved along the way, and lots of our presenters from then are still presenters now, and I think some of them were relatively unknown and are quite, I can say household names, but research household names. So it's been a lot of fun, and importantly for today, we're starting at a much more humane time than we started 10 years ago when we thought that running a 24-hour webinar was a great idea.
Thank you, Sue. And next, Navin, if I can call on you to introduce yourself, and you might even mention one of the joint projects we did with Sue over those the intervening 10 years.
Right. So, hi everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces, the attendees. So great to see you all virtually. And my name is Navin Williams, and I have been working for the last 10 years, digital-focused agency called MobileMeasure. And 10 years ago, it wasn't digital, but it was the whole offer was purely mobile. And that obviously has evolved with the market. And one of the things that Sue and Ray with me together we did was to actually come out with a book for researchers to use, the Handbook of Mobile Market Research. Hopefully all of you bought it. If not, please go to Amazon and buy it. Yeah, and yeah, that's me. Yeah, over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Navin. And Shobha.
Hi, Ray. Hi, everybody. I'm Shobha. I'm logging in from Mumbai in India. I am one of the co-founders of Drshti, and I am a career qualitative researcher, but I started in quant and moved into advertising. And then, since then I've been doing a lot of qualitative research here. And I guess one of the little things that you might want to know about me is I also have a cartoon column called Shobservatory, which you might be able to follow on Research World, SMR. That's a recent development, and I allowed that to come out a year ago. So that's me. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Shobha. And yes, I absolutely recommend that people have a look at the Research World and Shobha's cartoons. And I love the way that things keep developing. So that's great. And Brian.
Hi, everybody. This is Brian Fine. I'm Chairman of Quality Online Research and CEO of Australia Online Research. Interesting year that we first got this panel together, 2010. That was the year that both of the companies started. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I look forward to hearing more from Navin, Shobha and Brian in a moment. But let's go back to Sue. And Sue, 10 years ago, you talked about what quant researchers must learn from qual researchers. So what is your take today?
Thanks, Ray. I'm not actually going to speak about the same topic, but I think I'm going to pick up a couple of themes that are related to that topic. So in 2010, my presentation looked at non-random and non-representative samples, and it explored the idea that qualitative researchers are using non-representative samples all the time, and that maybe quant researchers could have a look at some of those strategies that qual researchers used and think about whether we could incorporate, learn from them, find value in applying some of those approaches to non-representative quant samples. So I'm pleased that we've got Shobha on the line, who has done both of those forms of research. And I know Brian has also done some work in non-rep samples and panels and things like that. So we've probably got a good brains trust here for this. In that presentation, I contrasted, some concepts of things like validity and reliability that we have in quant research, and looked at similar ideas that exist in qual around trustworthiness or how you can use triangulation, and sort of proposed some thoughts about how we might bring those things together. And there's also the idea in that presentation that, qual approaches sampling differently. There are ideas of things like purposeful sampling and talking to those you can learn the most from. And I think that is actually a really powerful idea, talk to the people that you can learn from. And a lot of that comes back to, thinking about the objectives of your research. So I think there's some really good ideas in there. And if I say so myself, I think the presentation stands up relatively well after 10 years. So if you're interested in a bit more of that, you could go to the Play Again page. But the new things that I wanted to talk about today is what we can take forward from that, ideas that are important for all researchers, but are really important for those who are looking at new and innovative approaches. And I think it's really important to keep in mind, because you're doing new stuff, we can't forget the past. We talked about this at the Research Society conference in August, that no matter what you're doing, you can't ignore the fundamentals. If you're designing new, exciting, innovative approaches or trying to evaluate them, you really do need core skills. I use this example a lot. You can't design or shouldn't design, say, something like a qual-at-scale chatbot project if you don't understand qualitative research. Similarly, if you don't understand sampling and representativity, you really can't evaluate the usefulness of many research studies, let alone new approaches. So I think, let's embrace the future, but let's remember, what it is that we can really build on, because I think that's where the power will come in. And the second theme that I think I explored in that earlier presentation is the idea of learning from others. Now, that could be adjacent disciplines. Say in 2010, I looked at the idea that qual approaches could perhaps help quant researchers. And I'd like us to continue to explore that idea of what we can learn. Now, whether that's learning from other disciplines or whether it's learning from other researchers, but in many ways, NewMR has been about sharing and exchanging ideas and helping everybody become better through this power of sharing. So I'd really like to encourage people to keep sharing what they know, keep doing new stuff, and share what you learn along the way, so that as a profession and an industry, we're all stronger.
Thank you, Sue. So is there any contributions other members of the panel would like to chip in at this point with things that Sue has mentioned? And just while you're thinking, I will query one with Sue to start with. So can you think of any nice examples of where people have talked about bringing in learning from other disciplines or other areas? I'm kind of thinking maybe Victoria Gamble's webinar she did for you recently would be one of those examples.
I mean, I think in many ways we're lucky that we're almost spoilt for choice in the research area. Now, whether that's in sort of our world of commercial research or academic research, we often see, people collaborating, people bringing different disciplines. And I think probably in our commercial space too, we are, starting to try and bring the different research strands together. For example, in the past, we have done, market research, insights, commercial research. We haven't so much talked to other people who are also doing research, who might be doing usability research, user research, analytics. There can be quite different silos. And I think, we're starting to see people recognizing that we're all researchers and trying to come together. So I think that's, a useful thing to try and continue, bring us all together, because more of us talking about more things will make us better.
Yeah. So I think this point about cross-learning is a very interesting one. Recently, we've been looking at a lot of input from design learning, design thinking. That I think is a great example of cross-disciplinary learning or disciplinary input into core fundamental research. So design thinking has had a lot of influence in, especially in UX UI, which is a growing space. And that's really come into its own, I think, in the last 4 to 5 years, especially with people getting online much more and buying happening online. So I think would you say that's a good example of what you had?
I think that's a fantastic example. And I think what we're starting to see too is sort of a breaking down of the vocab differences, if you like. Say, for example, things like sense making. We're starting to see, that, we talk about sense making, lots of other people talk about sense making, and, starting to break down. And Ray talked about, Victoria Gamble gave a webinar for the Research Society recently, where she sort of discussed, like in market research, we call it this. In user experience research, we will talk about, the same thing, but we'll call it something different. And I think that's a really useful thing to start to understand the differences in our terminology, but to understand that we're talking about the same things.
So anybody else from the panel, or indeed from the audience, if you've got any thoughts in the audience, just type them into the chat, and we will see them and we can ask them to Sue. Or they can just be your observation. It doesn't have to be in the form of a question. This is not like the old do not put your hand up if it's not a real question instruction. I think we have moved on to being a more collaborative way of doing business.
So I was interested in what you said about, staying in tune with the fundamentals. And I think that's a really important rock to hang on to when we are, everything around us is changing so rapidly, especially over the last year. But have you seen any changes in the training, because you are now involved in training? So are you seeing any change you are seeing in the way one needs to train fresh researchers now for the new world, really? Because I feel there are a few changes there. So, but what has your experience been in that?
I mean, I think like many things, we are probably in a space of real change. And I think, once again, it's one of those areas that 2020 has, really kind of sped up in terms of, things that might have, remained face-to-face have moved, very, very quickly online. I think a lot of people are experimenting, with what works, what doesn't work. And at the end of the day, we'll discover that some things work for some people, some things work for other people. Some people will always want short, sharp things. Some people will be happy with self-paced learning. Other people will not, make a success of self-paced learning. So I think we will, see in some ways a fragmentation. We will see, lots of different things happening. And I mean, I think over the next 12 months, we're going to probably be in a little bit of a wait and see in terms of, you know, do economies, you know, spring back, and also, you know, do things like the virus remain well controlled in some countries, so perhaps they can return a little bit to the past, and perhaps for other countries things like travel, you know, may not be possible. So I think we'll see, you know, online continuing to increase, but at the same time I think we will always see for some people, you know, a preference for some other ways of doing things.
Okay, so
I just want to do one last thing too, and it struck me, Navin, before we flow to you, another example of sort of cross disciplines is quite often in the mobile space. That was when we started to engage more with, you know, people who are experts in things like usability and user research. So that's another nice example of some crossing over.
which gives us a lovely segue, thank you, Sue, to Navin. So 10 years ago, Navin, you joined us and your topic was Asia and the developing world, smart enough for mobile MR. So how are things now from a somewhat cold Shanghai, I believe?
Yeah. Ray, if I look at 10 years ago, some numbers that I had shared 10 years ago was that the smartphone penetration worldwide smartphone penetration stood at 10%. We still had Symbian with around 40% of market share. And we were at a time where everyone knew the potential of mobile, but no one would bet on it. So it was a very interesting time. If we were in 2010 today, and 2000, the pandemic had happened then in 2009, 2010, I wouldn't have had to try and explain to people the difference between linear growth and exponential growth. Yeah. So today everyone knows, thanks to the pandemic. A good example is, I think, Kodak. So in 1930, the photographs that were taken worldwide were estimated to be 1 billion. Fast forward to year 2000, it had grown to 86 billion. And that's when digital photography really took off and moved to 2017. And worldwide photographs taken stood at 1.6 trillion. Yeah, I don't have the figure for 2020, but I would hazard a guess it would be 2 to 3 times that number. So what mobile, I think, has exponentially grown, and the services that we use within a mobile phone has exponentially grown as well. And while 10 years ago we were talking about the benefits of mobile for research, that's not in discussion anymore. It is part of our research offerings. And the portability of mobile obviously has yielded a lot of reaches places where it wasn't possible to reach earlier, at costs significantly lower than actually having people go and explore, especially in areas like ethnography. And this whole term of mobile and self-ethnography has come about, where we have the consumers be our researchers and explore topics that we want looked at and want visual proof of. In conclusion, I just want to say that that mobile is here to stay, but the definition of mobile is going to rapidly change. So you're already having all this wearable technology, and all that is mobile. So we are going to get into an era where sensors and wearable devices are going to actually be integrated into devices like a mobile. And as AI really comes into its own, we're going to have a host of new challenges and opportunities, and hopefully we as researchers should be at the forefront of that.
Thanks, Navin. So just to press a little bit on what you've just said, 10 years ago, you were talking about there is going to be a major change of direction. We're going to become more mobile, and this will be the whole world. It will be the developing market. It will be China, Asia, and so on. And that was entirely correct. Are we going to see another change of direction, or are we going to see the same changes just continuing to accelerate, do you think?
If I look at the broad macro picture, from a penetration point of view, the developing world doesn't have much space to grow. Like the US is at around 72% mobile penetration. China is almost there at around 71 or so. And worldwide penetration from 10% 10 years ago is at around 45%. And even if you look at Asia Pacific, it's still under 50. So all the growth that you're going to see in the next 5 years or a decade would mostly come from Asia. So all the innovation, all the utilization to potential, you're going to see, I think, in Asia first. And I think one of the good examples is payment. Yeah. So I don't think I have carried cash in the last 2 years. So as long as I leave home with my mobile phone, I know I can get on the bus, I can get on the mobile metro, I can buy candy at the grocery stores, whatever. I don't need cash for anything, and that's going to be the norm. In fact, we're going to get into a state where if you wanted to pay cash, whatever goods and services would cost you more.
Absolutely. Now, somebody in the audience has put their hand up. Unfortunately, on Zoom, that doesn't do very much other than tell me that somebody's hand is up. So if you want to make a point privately, just to myself and the panel, then go to chat and select just the panelists. If you want to make an observation to the whole audience, then select all panelists and attendees. So Sue, Shobha, Brian, do you have any thoughts or questions or additional observations to make on the issue that Navin has raised?
I just have an observation, and I think, the things Navin is saying is resonating very strongly. Of course, I mean, in India, we are not as non-cash as in Shanghai, because we're not built that way yet, and there's a long way to go. But there is definitely a trend towards that. But I also find it interesting how linear the trend is. Like, I saw his paper, what he had presented 10 years ago. The things that he has predicted in a very linear way have actually come true. So in the last year, it's been accelerated, but I think there's a linearity to the way things are progressing. So today, now, if we are sitting here and saying that AI is going to impact our future the next 5 years, I actually believe it. And I think something has happened in the last 1 year, which has made us very open to change. So I have a feeling that changes will be accelerated, even going forward, even if the pandemic dies down. What do you think? Is that the feeling that you have, Navin?
Yeah, definitely. And I think these real life examples like COVID and things make people believe prior when they might have thought it's impossible. It's like how last time. I haven't been to India since last December. But when I was there, I remember when we went to the Chaatwala, that's like street snacking food, and my sister paid him using Paytm, which is a mobile wallet service, and uh, a lot of financial services traditionally, especially if they're new age, are not accessible to say vendors and things like that. And but now I think mobile has democratized the whole what is possible and what is achievable, and this is going to play a role as well in exponential growth, especially in countries like India, where the rural market has been forgotten for decades, and we are going to see a rapid rise in their participation in the economy.
Also interesting, and it's a slightly different tangent, just to reflect though on some of the trends that people are talking about that may or may not come out of this recent period of people reverting to nostalgia and people baking bread, and there's often tales of people wanting to relocate from cities to more regional areas and things. And obviously we don't know what will happen, and some of it will depend on how long the current environment, but there sort of is a move forward, but also a sort of a quest for comfort, I suppose.
It's worth stating the obvious that mobile is critical to online research as well, and becoming even more so. So access to people through mobiles and the quality of the technology on mobiles is terribly important to make sure we can represent the population.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, I think in India, we have been able to reach quite a few respondents who would have been hard to reach, like people in the really lower end of society, who all have smartphones. I mean, the smartphone penetration is so high that we have been able to go to really remote areas, to rural areas, all through the mobile. And it has been happening for a while, but it really came into its own, I think, in the last year. So that's I think a big, it makes a big impact on how much you can do in qualitative research in particular.
Another thing that comes up from time to time, which people from sort of wealthier countries sometimes forget, is that mobile data costs a lot more in developing countries, doesn't it, Navin? Whereas we assume it's sort of relatively cheap.
Actually, no. The cheapest data, mobile data access available in the world is actually India. So I think
that's true.
if you see countries like Indonesia, countries which are populous can offer affordable and cheap data access, but countries like, say, Singapore may not. So it's a mixed bag. So like a lot of African countries, even today, data is quite expensive because they have large land masses but not enough people. And if they need to put the cell towers all over the place, it's going to cost money. But in India, that's not the problem. Enough people to consume. And in China, it's not as cheap as India, but it's I don't think anyone really is worried about how much their surfing and watching movies is costing them.
Great, thank you so much, Navin. And now we're going to turn our focus to Shobha, who 10 years ago asked us to listen to the sounds of silence, which was an intriguing presentation. I urge you to go back and check it out sometime. But Shobha, what are you talking about today?
Hi, Ray. So today I'm talking about the changes that I have seen in qualitative research. If you remember, the paper on silence was a technique to be used in qualitative. So I decided to focus on that and see what has changed over the last decade. And I mean, obviously a lot has changed, but taking on from some of the points that Sue and Naveen made, I think one area is, of course, people have become far more digital. And I think what I wanted to reflect on is what impact this has had on the consumers themselves. For instance, 10 years ago, most in India, a lot of the purchases were made offline, and online was just about coming in. And people were still worried about, payments and, security and so on. But if you cut to 2020, I mean, the amount of purchase that's being made online is enormous. And the way that they choose, how they choose, and who they are as a result of how they choose, how they behave, the behavioral changes have been quite enormous. So this has led us to question the whole framework of how people buy, how people decide and choose has been disrupted. So a lot of the briefs we have got, recently from companies is to try and understand how people are making choices and how people are buying. So that's a big change that's happened in the kind of work that's being done. And also, people's self-perception has changed. Now that social media has become even bigger than before, people lead online and offline lives. There was a point, let's say around 2015, 2016, I think, where questions around, is there a difference between an online and offline personality or a persona came up. But I think now that has sort of merged because life has sort of merged in that sense. So the way we therefore question consumers, the kind of issues that we raise when we talk to them, that I find has changed. So that's one. And then on to this whole how consumers have adapted to change, and particularly in the last year, is also fascinating because if you can imagine, in India we go to people who are pretty by international standards poor, though by Indian standards they are probably lower middle class or whatever. These people have never been on a Zoom call in their lives. And in the last year, we have been able to access them, teach them how to use Zoom, get them onto focus group discussions conducted online. And they have been able to adapt with very little difficulty. And the kind of quality of input we get from that has actually been much better than we anticipated. And their ease on online, the ease on mobile has been very interesting to see. And we have also been able to meet them, as qualitative researchers. We don't like online methods. It's just against the way we are. We like to meet people. We like to, talk to them, interact with them in their environments. We like the touch and feel of the whole process. And to put us in houses and say you have to meet consumers online only is like, it's a bit disruptive to our, self-perception, who we are as researchers. But interestingly, we have sometimes been able to get more intimate glimpses of the consumer through mobile methods than we would have earlier. For instance, we did a study on pet foods, and we got all our respondents to get their pets to say hello on camera. And I don't think that would have happened in a standard focus. So, these are the kind of interesting discoveries that we have been making. So that is in the space of online. The other change, of course, is in what Sue was discussing earlier, which is sense making. So today, the whole concept of your Facebook data, understanding, analytics, text analytics, even video analytics, and so on, has resulted in a certain hybrid form of qual-quant, because you have a huge mass of data, but you need a qualitative mind to make sense of it. So sense making is actually essentially a qualitative skill. And I think there is where, the nature of qualitative, the use of qualitative thinking, if there is such a thing as design thinking, there is such a thing as qualitative thinking. So use of qualitative thinking has grown. And at times I feel that, people think that quant is maybe an endangered species. I don't know, I'm not going to comment on that. But I don't think qual is. I think qual is only becoming much more important in the way people are making sense of things that are going on using the data that we have on hand. So in all, I think the other areas where change is happening rapidly and will happen is the use of artificial intelligence. So as Navin pointed out, that's going to be the future, and I'd like to watch it. I'd watch it with great interest. We have already been in conversation with the AI service providers to see, what is possible and what's not possible. It's still in its infancy, but I think probably in the next couple of years, we'll see some use of artificial intelligence in qualitative. I wouldn't say a lot, but some use in helping us perform some of the more basic aspects of our job. So it's in its infancy, but shows a lot of promise. Lastly, I think the other area which I find which is moving away from technology and methods, etc., is client requirements. I think they have started to ask for, or they have always, but more so now, ask for much more strategic outputs from qualitative researchers in particular, because the faith in qualitative research to be able to provide insights to direct strategic thought is quite high, and therefore the demand to have that as the output rather than just insights. But so what is the action that you want me to take is a very strong and hard question being asked nowadays. So that's I think some of the changes that I have seen. So over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Shobha. And we have a question in the audience from Ajanta Roy, also from India, asking, how do we perceive online qualitative going forward? What does the future look like? And she comments that she's been doing focus group discussions, even with farmers in India, online. Will we go back, do you think, to face-to-face when it becomes more straightforward? We've got the vaccines, the pandemic goes away. Or do you think that we're going to develop these online techniques further?
Hi, Ajanta. Thanks for the question. So I think that there's no looking back. I mean, we are now in the new normal. I think we will have hybrid methods, and we will selectively use online and offline where necessary. We will use offline methods where necessary. I think that's the new thinking. One thing that this last year has done for us is to push us to see how far we can go online. And the answer to that has been we can go very far, which is not something we knew or felt earlier. So given that, I think online is very much here to stay. It will be probably about 60 to 70% of all qualitative research to be done, at least in the next 3 years, if not more, but 3 years for sure. Partly because of the pandemic and partly because the thinking has altered. So, but offline will come back. I mean, offline, for instance, we haven't been able to do any ethnographies in the last, the proper ethnographies where, we get an understanding of the environment completely. We've done a lot of user-related ethnography, but not, the sociological sort of ethnography. So that we will have to go offline for. Also, there's a limitation to online in terms of, how much you can do. For instance, there are certain product tests and so on, which you really cannot, you need an offline forum to do that. So I think it will be selective and thought through. But both will be there together.
So, Shobha, I'm going to press you on precise language, because what you said a moment ago is we will do online when it is necessary. But when
offline when it's necessary. Yeah.
But yes, I think that's exactly it. I think from what you're saying, we will do offline when it is necessary.
Absolutely.
And that is probably the fundamental shift that has happened.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a good and interesting change. I'd certainly encourage people from the qualitative world to be very involved in artificial intelligence. If we imagine there are 7 sorts of people in the world, from people who are very much hard-edged analytical through to people who have much higher emotional intelligence. The people who are writing the software for artificial intelligence come almost exclusively from one of those 7 types. And many of the problems we're seeing with artificial intelligence is because actually the thinking that's going into it doesn't have the qualitative understanding, these other types going into the process. Any thoughts on that, Shobha?
I don't know enough about it, Ray, honestly, because, I need artificial intelligence, even the people, service providers that I have been talking to, they have not been offering artificial intelligence, genuine artificial intelligence in qualitative research. So I'm not very sure that I know enough to be able to comment on that aspect. Maybe Navin or Brian could help on that.
Thoughts, Navin or Brian?
Yeah, so I think the first point is that what is available to the public is at its infancy. But if you're a professional chess player or a Go player or even automated cars, it has advanced a lot. Yeah. For our requirements, we are probably quite low in the pecking order. However, like a lot of these technologies, the acquisition cost is going to become as the proof of the pudding gets more tasty. The cost of acquisition is going to get very affordable, and for probably soft just a few dollars subscription, or we would get access to very powerful systems, and it would become like a shared resource, and we would be able to build solutions around it which are for research. Right now, I don't think we are anywhere near there. It's very in its not just in its infancy. It's not, we cannot in any real manner depend on it for coming to any research conclusions and things. So I think if you were to put a figure, if someone's using it for research, probably it's still 70-80% manual and dependent on the researcher. And that ratio, the day that ratio changes, then that's when I think adoption will become like mobile.
But having said that, Naveen, recently we've been speaking to some people who can do video analytics using AI. So, it learns while it goes on. So, so that gives you enormous opportunity, because manually you can't sift through, 100 videos or 500 videos. So AI is very useful there, if you're able to get an input there. And that adds to the, if you want to understand trends and things like that.
Agreed. But the thing is about access and making it useful for your requirement. So you need to train it for it to be used. The visual sorting and then putting it in buckets. That not enough people are doing right now. Even if you're doing it, if it's project based, it's still one project uses it and that's it. And but if the industry needs to benefit from it, it needs to be a much broader thought out process.
Okay, so we're nearly at the end of this topic. I just want to pick up on one thing in the chat stream from Mark. The need to highlight to clients what we can't do online. So perhaps the pendulum is even swung too far for some clients, assuming that everything is possible online, and that we need to make this point that Shobha made, that sometimes offline is still necessary and it's going to be necessary.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and I think it's I agree with Mark that that's important to call out. But we need to sit back and think about this and figure out, where we need to tell clients that you cannot do online, you have to do on the offline, and where we need to tell them that you don't need to do offline, you would do online, and some areas where you would benefit by doing online. So there are two aspects to this. One is the convenience aspect, and the other is the effectiveness aspect. So we'll have to think that through and see, realign what we do to see what works where. I think that's
We're
something.
running into time problems, but I'd like to just add that we are strong believers in using hybrid methodologies where appropriate to reach certain groups that can't be reached online. And certainly, so there are times when using other methodologies are more important than online for the particular objectives.
Absolutely. And indeed, that brings us to you, Brian. And all of the presentations from 10 years ago were very good, particularly the ones from Shobha, Navin, and Sue. But actually, the one that had the most immediate impact for me was Brian's presentation, where he talked about serious games. Does it have a place in the future of market research? Because the very next webinar we ran focused on gaming. One of the speakers at that webinar was Brian, and another speaker was Betty Adamu, who went on to write the book about using games and gamification in market research. So, Brian, you were very prescient 10 years ago talking about serious games. What have you got to talk to us about today?
All right, thank you, Ray, and hello, everyone. The one thing that I did when I looked back at my paper from 10 years ago, and it's the first time I did it for this seminar, was a bit of deja vu, because if I was writing a paper today, the issues that were present 10 years ago are still there, and I probably could have come up with the same proposal that serious games may have a place in online research to try and improve on quality. I had a look at Ray's blog or post on LinkedIn, and there was a comment from Chris Robinson, thank you, Chris, where he said, I don't feel that anyone will really mention the sellout to panels as a sample source for most market research these days. Despite the research that shows extensive and poor representation of populations, extremely poor response quality, and almost no serious QC. But let's trade off cheap and fast for accuracy. And our own Navin, who's speaking here today, said it's a choice we have made as an industry. He says we are prioritizing cheap and fast because he tried to put a premium on it and people didn't want to pay that. So if I revisited what I said, just a couple of the slides from 2010, you'll recognize some of the issues. I said that market research's major asset is willing and accessible customers, and response rates are dropping. Panels are a growth methodology, but there are issues with retention and there are quality issues. We need to make it fun. Now, serious games was a way to try and fix participation rates, engagement and attention to questions, completion rates, online panelist retention. And the benefits we saw, or I saw at the time, were that you would get greater engagement and involvement. It would be a bit of fun. It would allow people to focus. It would increase validity, and it would increase panel retention and participation and response rates. The issues, however, required a bit of serious research, because depending on what type of serious game you came up with, there would be different levels of interest and different IQs in the population. The creativity of the game, the scalability of the game, there'd be boredom, updating and replacing the game, relevance to all surveys, and the profile of those that play. And you'd have a real monster of a problem trying to weight it. Our conclusions were that entertainment can lead to greater involvement and focus. The opportunity to learn from disciplines outside of market research was a good one. And games are being applied in commerce to training, education, communication, and advertising. So why not in market research? We needed to look at testing consumer needs and interests, differing IQs, measuring bias that it introduces, measuring benefits, impact on results of good versus mediocre games, weighting implications, and timing impacts. So we thought at the time, this is in 2010, that serious games could provide a solution, but to do it properly would take time, and to integrate it into market research culture and methodologies will be at a cost, and that new skill sets and resources will be required. I suggested that a niche group of researchers will address it and solve some of the issues with increased recruitment, participation, involvement, validity, and retention. So where are we now? Well, not a lot has changed. Gamification market research is still a good idea, but a niche idea. It requires a huge investment to test it properly. We need to do parallel studies to assess the impact of different games and different target groups. Clients need to be willing to pay for quality research. And we know the issues, but do clients understand the impact of driving costs down on quality? How much has changed? Well, there's been more online in the last 10 years, and COVID has accelerated this. There's more experimentation with artificial intelligence. We have more pervasive CX and CS research for every interaction or transaction. There's more survey fatigue, more competitive pressure on the share of time for respondents, but overall with greater streaming sources, direct marketing newsletters, as well as people being on multiple panels, constantly bombarding them with invitations. The lack of change, there's been no major investment in gamification, unfortunately, and no dramatic improvement in quality, representative samples by any method or validity. The pluses and the minuses since 2010, I think we've got better design. We drag and drop, and we have virtual reality shelf research. There's more technology, improved access and presentation of data. There's more experimentation with AI, avatars, tools, and questionnaire design, visualization, and there's a heightened awareness of the issues. The negatives since then are cost pressures, as Chris has said, cheap and cheerful. Online panels are becoming a commodity purchase. The time spans are decreasing, share of time is becoming more competitive, and questionnaires are still long and boring, so there's a need to engage people. I think that there's still the same issues. Decent size of random probability samples today are impossible. Panel samples or convenience samples have no real significance testing. Issues include size of sample, interview length, the types of research required. If you were doing incidence measurements, large and robust samples versus attitudes where close enough is good enough, and target groups, and when hybrid methodology is required. So we really need to think about when we need quality and whether or not we can step up and spend the money. So there's a need now for more experimentation. We need to check the current state of quality against census-type benchmarks. We need to set KPIs and track quality over time. We need to measure panel satisfaction and the reasons. We need to ask them how easy the surveys are and ask them why they participate. In 2000, I did a survey with our panelists, and we found that in almost equal shares, there were 3 reasons they became a panelist. One was for incentives, one was for giving their opinions, and one was for being part of a community. It'd be interesting to see what it is today. The development of technology applications such as chatbots and AI and avatars are also worth exploring. With that, I'll close off and open up for discussion.
Thank you, Brian. And I think the conversation that happened on LinkedIn and the contribution from Navin were very interesting in that I don't think it's the case that in the last 10 years things have got worse. They were pretty bad 10 years ago, Brian, as you've just said. Who do you think is mostly to blame for things not improving in the last 10 years? Because you spelled out lots of things that we could have done, that a few people do, but many people don't. So what was the driving force? Is it the panel companies, is it the agencies, or is it the end clients?
Is that a question to me?
To you, first of all, and if anybody else wants to chip in. I have a very strong opinion as to which of those 3 groups are the key
I think
drivers.
the whole industry is driven by the end clients, whether they recognize it or not. Their pressure on price and cost is going to drive panels to try and reduce their costs. And if you've got reduced costs and you're reducing the incentives and you're reducing the cost of collecting and maintaining and replenishing panels, it's going to be hard for you to spend the money on things like serious games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we were to share out the pie for the responsibility of online research, quant research in particular, not improving, I would put 90 to 95% of the driver of that with the end clients, by not insisting on the quality and by not buying the quality that is required, I think is the key driver within that. And obviously some don't understand, but there's a lot of information out there.
Right. Read 95% at the client's doorstep is probably not, they have their own commercial drivers, but it does not stop from, researchers saying that these are our limits and we, cannot do this kind of work, because sometimes clients come with a 1-hour questionnaire which they want to do on mobile, and a lot of other ridiculous requests. And I think we play a larger role than just 5%, where we need to say like this is not worth it, because crap goes in, crap comes out, and we are holding the baby at the end.
Any other thoughts on that narrow point before we take on the broader points that Brian's mentioned and brought along today? So Brian, what sort of things are you seeing that are encouraging?
I think that technology is improving the quality of the surveys, the participation rates, the getting to know your panelists. I've always been a fan of saying that you can't just say that online is better or worse than caddy interviewing. You need to be able to understand each of the methodologies to be able to manage it. So I think understanding the methodology, the weaknesses, and being able to manage it are all good things. I think that the use of artificial intelligence, avatars, testing, shorter surveys, testing sort of fusion of smaller surveys to bring together larger surveys. I think one of the biggest problems we have is the clients who need over 20 minutes worth of interviewing in one survey. And that's going to cause a huge amount of a churn on the panels. And it's very, very hard to get quality by the time you get to the end of it.
Yeah, I saw a very interesting comment in a French presentation last week, which was, and I'm going to murder the French, moins detail, plus souvent, less detail more often. And I think that's possibly part of the answer, Brian. If we can encourage people to build a picture longitudinally, then we don't have to ask as much. We don't have to ask 20 minutes in one go. We can build 60 minutes built over 3 or 4 months.
Yep, no, that longitudinally and integration of multiple data sources. I think the use of primary data as well as secondary data should be used more often, and that means that you can work with a smaller questionnaire, shorter questionnaire, as well as other data to try and get a better picture and more accurate, valid picture.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, Brian. So we've run for the predicted hour. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to add a 10-year thought, and I'm going to come back to the panel and just run through them in the same sequence. What would you anticipate changing over the next 10 years? Hopefully good news. All right, a very interesting comment here. Nobody's talked about the comments of the quality of reporting. I think actually Brian did touch on that, in that the technologies for reporting have moved forward. Anybody got any thoughts, panel, on how over the last 10 years reporting has changed?
I think the speed.
Shobha?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I think the speed of reporting, the speed with which we are expected to turn out a report, at least from a qualitative perspective, and also I think there is a need for less detailing and more insight. So therefore, shorter, sharper reports with evidence to support is the kind of reporting that that seems to be required now. That would be my comment. Apart from that, but that was a requirement even earlier. I don't think that the requirement has changed. So I think the speed and the sharpness and the strategic orientation of the research of the reports, I think, has become more of the asks now.
As an observer of the industry to some extent, I think that the need for more accountable reporting has risen, and people are asking for something which will give them a direction, a blueprint for action.
I think the whole movement towards agile solutions now is picking up pace. So this whole real-time reporting, online dashboards, and self-managed tools on the reporting front, I think that has really picked up pace. And I think this year has added to the urgency. It was always on the cards. In fact, as long as online research has been around, but there was a reluctance for mainstream agencies to push it because there was a feeling that it would cannibalize the core business. And the reality is that both can live side by side, because the quick and agile solutions often are not deep enough, and sometimes you need that depth. So yes, eventually we have seen that a lot of large ad hoc agencies have slowly had to merge with other agencies to survive, and and the boutiques have had to come up with services and solutions which are more unique. But agile is something that's going to be common for everyone, and that's the space I think that's going to grow in the next couple of years.
It's another word on reports. I think also the look, because the reports are circulated to a wide audience inside the client company. So the way a report is articulated, the way it is presented, and so that people can understand what's said in as little time as possible. I think those aspects have also become very important. So internally for them to circulate it and get everyone on the same page on a single report, because there are so many vested interests and different perspectives. So a report could be misused depending. So a lot of effort is made to clean a report to make sure that there is no ambiguity in the language or the way it's being presented.
Okay, super. So we better take this summary session. So I'm going to turn to Sue. Any thoughts about the next 10 years?
I will keep it short and sharp, but I think along with things that Shobha and Navin and others have touched on today, I think if you're going to keep your eye on one thing, it's AI and where that might take us over the next 10 years, because I think it really could be quite exciting. And I think there's a lot to learn and lots of opportunities.
Navin?
Yeah. I think agile solutions and DIY solutions are going to play an outsized role than they traditionally did. And companies like Zappy, who are considered pioneers at their time, are just that their service is going to be replicated across everyone, irrespective of what they are offering. There would always be an agile offer, and with the increased DIY kind of outlook, we're going to see smaller and more nimble organizations. Yeah.
Thanks, Navin. Shobha?
Yeah, so I think I think online is here to stay. I think AI will be there, but it will take its time to come through. I think that this has set the tone for how it's going to be for the next 5 or 6 years. The way we are doing research this year is going to be how it's going to be for the next 5 or 6 years. And AI will creep in on us, but unless we have another cataclysmic event like the COVID, I don't think AI will burst in on us. I think it's a slow burn and pretty much status quo, because we've got onto a new thing, and it'll take us about 2-3 years to settle in with it. So that would be my prediction.
Great. And finally, Brian.
I'm very hopeful that in 10 years' time, when we have the next session, we will see that quality has improved because we have set about benchmarking quality now. We're tracking how it changes, and we're looking at ways to improve it, and people will start caring a little bit about the quality and the impact it has on the outputs.
Great point, and I hope that too. So thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody who attended. I hope wherever you are safe and enjoying life. And please enjoy the next 10 years as we move forward. And that is the end of this particular broadcast. Thank you so much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody.